All right. Anyone else? Yes, opposition to LD 1977.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today.
Actually, and before you get started, I just want to thank, I know a lot of you have been waiting here for several hours now, and I just want to say thank you for your time. I know a lot of you have taken time away from your businesses to be here, and we just appreciate you and your patience, so thank you.
So my name is Walter Alcorn. I'm with the Consumer Technology Association. We represent manufacturers and retailers of consumer electronics. So some of the devices that have been talked about today, cell phones, computers, printers, we represent manufacturers and retailers of those devices. I'm the Vice President for Environmental Affairs and Industry Sustainability.
There's something that I would like to develop in my viewers and listeners, which is a healthy skepticism for silly-sounding modern job titles. One instance would be Lisa Jackson at Apple. She is the Vice President of Policy and Social Initiatives, and she says things like, and I quote, "I don't think you can say repairability equals longevity," and, quote, "I often say if you're in the repair business, repair seems like the answer." Yes, if someone has a broken device, fixing it is the answer. And longevity tends to be related to whether or not you can fix a device that breaks. My favorite parts are when they say the silent part out loud, like, "Our first thought is, you don't need to repair this." Gee, I wonder what her second thought is. Our second thought is, buy a new one, you effing scrub. These are the types of things that come out of the mouths of people with these types of job titles. So what they often do is they make the job title the exact opposite of what they're actually doing so that it sounds nice. Always be wary of silly job titles in these hearings. Also be wary of the fact that he lobbies on behalf of the same organization as Mr. Charlie Brown. This is where I start to get a little bit jealous because clearly CTA can afford to have two separate lobbyists for West Coast and East Coast so that their lobbyist doesn't have to spend 6 hours in coach on an aircraft with a semi-broken seat that winds up causing back pain for the next week. But I'm not salty.
So what I wanted to do is really focus on some of the environmental issues that have been raised, just very quickly. Issue that's been raised about e-waste and concern about how not passing legislation like this might increase e-waste. I would remind the committee that actually Maine does have a robust...
Where have I heard this before?
Robust.
They're not the only firm that does this.
We believe this legislation is in search of a problem that does not exist.
Gee, I wonder who's been copying whose book report recently.
Something that's resonated with me is something that you heard early on here, is this is legislation in search of a problem.
Can you guys at least pretend that you're not reading off of the same piece of paper? It's just a small detail that I notice after listening to these hearings for a regular amount of time. Some of them may change the stuff up a little bit, but it really does seem to me like they actually sit in a room where they're trained and they go over this with focus groups, and this one says, say that's a solution in search of a problem, and the other one says, make sure you say robust as often as you can. And then they all look at each other and go, yes, sir. Okay, sir. We will use the vocabulary that you have specified on the paper, sir. It's all so depressing because it's so soulless and so lacking in original thought. I know that the person who's reading these words does not believe or probably did not write or come up with those words. That's not that person's thought process.
E-waste law and program in place. It's something actually we're talking with DEP about making better and maybe some administrative changes, but it is very much in place right now. This is not, we're not looking at a situation where we're having e-waste in Maine going into landfills.
This is disingenuous for a number of reasons. The first is just because the e-waste is not in your backyard in Maine does not mean it doesn't eventually make its way to some sort of landfill somewhere else. There's lots of e-waste that winds up in landfills, not just locally. It's kind of like a hot potato thing where people don't like the concept of having to pay a high rate for e-waste recycling, so they wind up just sending it someplace else. And you can see what happens in a lot of these countries in Africa where they just have these huge piles of e-waste. You can see pictures of it on iFixit. It doesn't just magically disappear simply because it's no longer in your backyard or not in a landfill in your backyard. Further, you don't know what the consumers actually did in all cases with their old devices. I've never had someone ask me, what did you do with your old laptop or electronics? Most people I know have never been asked that question. Most of you have probably never been asked that question, so where'd those figures come from? Thirdly, I think there is an economic and environmental cost, not considered here, mostly environmental, of when something breaks and you block their ability to fix their old device. There is an environmental cost associated with forcing someone to buy a new device before they were planning to. So if I planned on keeping a device for 5 years, and now I can only keep it for 1.5 years, I now have to buy a new one, which means a new one has to be produced for me 3 or 4 years before I needed it to be produced. And there is an environmental cost associated with making that new device. Now, I'm not going to try and say that it's immoral or unethical to buy new, but I am saying that it's immoral and unethical to twist people's arm to try and get them to buy new before they plan to by blocking access to repairs that otherwise would have been completely viable for their old device.
The other thing that I would note is nationally, in the United States, U.S. EPA says that e-waste is the fastest declining part of the municipal solid waste stream. That was not true 15 years ago when I first started working on e-waste issues, but it is true today. So, and I'm happy to put this in writing and share the links with all of you. So, in fact, the environmental footprint of the electronics industry from a waste standpoint is declining. The other thing that was cited previously was the number of cell phones that get disposed of. That I've seen that referenced in testimony before. If you search and search and search on EPA's website, you have to go into an archived page to find that, and if you read it, it actually is the number of cell phones that are no longer used and are given away or handed off or recycled or disposed in any given year. So at CTA, we do every couple of years a consumer survey to find out what consumers do with their mobile devices, and I just want to share with you some of the results that put that number into perspective. What we found is that about a third of consumers actually do something with their smartphone or other mobile device in any given year. So 2/3 of us don't do anything with our smartphones and mobile devices. A third of us get rid of them in one way or another. Only 2% of all smartphone owners actually dispose of them in the trash. So it's very rare. And there's a really good reason for this. I think, you know, we all know that these things are valuable. 10 times as many people actually trade in their smartphone or mobile device as throw it away. We also have 4 times as many that actually give it away, you know, either to a relative or a friend. 3 times as many as throw it in the trash actually recycle it, and 3 times as many actually sell it. So what this shows, I think the only way that you have value in these things is for reuse purposes, for refurbishment and reuse. There's not enough value in these things from a recycling perspective to make money off of it.
The first one is regarding trading the phone in. He says most people are trading the phones in, they're not getting thrown away. But if you take a look at where modern technology is with e-waste recycling, if you give a phone that is dead to someone who plans to try and recycle it without fixing it, they are not reclaiming most of that device. The great majority of everything that goes into that device is not going to be reused in any way, shape, or form. All that does is ensure that toxic chemicals are not going to be released into the water or the air, but that doesn't necessarily mean that any of that is actually going to be recycled in terms of being reused. Reuse is the #1 point on the hierarchy of recycling. Before you throw it in a recycling bin, if you can actually reuse it, you're then making use of 100% of it rather than making use of 15 or 17 or 20% of it, because our ability to reclaim materials out of a liquid damaged cell phone or MacBook is slim to none. Secondly, when he talks about the devices that are being recycled, that's not a moneymaker. They're not making money off of recycling devices. He's defending a point that was never made. We're not saying that you're making money off of recycling the devices. We're saying that you're making money hand over fist by twisting people's arms into buying a new one. No, you're not making money when I give you back the old broken thing. I know you're not making much on the recycling. You're making money when you make it difficult to fix the old one, forcing us to purchase a new one. That's where you make the money. When somebody says, oh, I can't get a chip to this $600 phone. Let me buy the $1,000 phone this year rather than waiting a year or two. That's where the money is made. So it's a bit disingenuous to imply that you don't make money on recycling while ignoring the fact that you do make money hand over fist by selling someone a new device before the life cycle should have been completed for the old one.
So what I think that shows overall is that there is actually a very robust
He couldn't help himself.
market right now for repair and resale of these devices. And I think what a lot of you have heard today is a battle amongst companies who are doing that business. So you have one set of companies fighting another to get the business. And I understand, and there are a lot of complicated issues, but
We are not fighting Apple for the business. When Apple tells a customer it'll be $1,100 to $1,900 to fix a machine that has a bent pin in the LCD cable. We are not fighting Apple for that business. When Apple says that it's going to be $1,500 to fix a MacBook Pro that has one bad $10 chip on the motherboard, we are not fighting them for that business. That fight was won and fought a long time ago, and consumers, hand over fist, have decided that they would like us to work on the product. I'm not fighting them for the business. What I'm doing is I'm advocating for our ability to be able to purchase the tools, the chips, and the schematics to be able to do our job. And I'm also fighting for the ability to not have other people sent to prison, go to jail, because they give me access to the schematics, parts, or tools to do my job based on erroneous intellectual property law that is being used and abused way past its original intentions.
Thank you for looking into this. I think I would recommend that you do look at studying this. I think that's a really good idea because there are a lot of issues, including a lot of the ones raised by other manufacturing industries and equipment industries that apply to consumer technology devices as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here today. Yes, Senator Guerin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you brought up a really good point about the post-use of your old phones. I've given them to my children. I've given them to my mother. Last week, I dropped mine at the garage and it was run over. But when I took it in, hoping they could get the information off it for my new phone, they offered to recycle it for me. Do you want your phone back, or would you like me to recycle this? That was Verizon. So are most of the providers suggestive selling, recycling?
Yes. What we've seen, and again, this is really driven by the economics of the reuse market. So as a policy, most carriers and retailers will take back any smartphone that anybody brings in. They'll basically put it towards reuse and refurbishment if it hasn't been run over, if there's value. But by and large, they'll take anything, and that covers the recycling cost. So basically, the value that's gotten from the sale in the reuse market, for example, is it's enough to cover the recycling cost.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're all going to have to be a little more careful around Senator Guerin. Any other questions for members of the committee? No. Seeing none, thank you very much. Yeah, anyone else who wishes to testify in opposition to LD 1977?